Okay, well, welcome. Welcome to the Conversation Coalition. It is so nice to see you here. I mean, we're meeting to talk about the big questions in life. Isn't that amazing? I'm so excited. I don't see you as excited as I am, but I'm okay. I'm very excited about this. So I'll just tell you a little bit about who we are. We're just a group of friends, Christians and atheists that, got together and said, it is so important to have conversations. And if we have conversations about, conversations that matter, that it's even better, We all, when we are alone and no one is looking and we start wondering about the big questions, we, at least this is my experience and my friend's experience, we go, we don't get to the opportunity to talk about these things that often. So I've been doing this for a few years, but now doing it with friends, Christians and atheists, as a group together with one objective, which is, hey, let's have this conversation together. Let's be super civic. Is that the way you say it? Civil. Civic is the Honda. So let's be civil. But at the same time, let's challenge each other. We're not here just to have a nice conversation, just to not step on anyone's toes. We really want to challenge each other. That's why we're here. Now, at the same time, as we are disagreeing with each other, just keep in mind that we together, as a unity, we're becoming an example for people to replicate this, so that people can see, I think I can do this at home. I can do this with my friends. I could just hang out with them and have these conversations. Why not? So this is the spirit about what we do. Now, before we start talking about what we're doing and we start having the conversation, I just want to say thank you to the Dawson Fellowship that hosts us. Please give a round of applause. They are all for the big questions and just to give us a space to have these conversations on a monthly basis. That's beautiful. So we're super thankful for that. One thing I would say, I've never said this, but it happened to us one time. So if you come here to have conversations, perfect. Ask each other questions, perfect. But you cannot promote, give flyers about, promote any church or any, let's say, secular movement. We're here to have conversations. If you guys want to do that, it has to be outside. But here, please, ask each other questions. That's what we want, to start conversations. So what we're going to do today is the following. I'm going to ask both speakers to introduce themselves, then they'll have 5 minutes to answer the question, does God exist? That's the question that we're tackling today. And then we'll start a conversation. It will take us, it's going to be all around 1 hour. And then after this hour, we're going to Q&A session. And that's where you come in to the play. And then please think about what Tim is going to say, what Sydney is going to say. Think about questions. And I always say the same thing. If you think about one question, you go, I don't know I should ask that question. That is the question that you should ask. Okay, so that is the one. That's why we're here. So super excited about this. And before we get into the conversation, just know we have sign-up sheets over there if you want to receive the newsletter. You can find us also on Facebook and soon on Twitter, now X. And also our email is conversationcoalitionnashville@gmail.com. If you guys have any questions about this, please ask us. Any of the members that are volunteering for this event to be possible, just ask any questions. Thank you so very much for being here. Let's get into it. So, Sydney, let's give her a round of applause, please.
Thank you.
Sydney is our atheist speaker today, but Sydney, before we go to the question, what does God exist? Why don't you tell us a little bit about you?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Sydney Davis. I am the host of a podcast called Growing Up Fundy, where I interview people who grew up in religious households, whether they're still religious, atheists, changed religions, any story from anyone who grew up within faith. I interview them, and it's available on Spotify, YouTube, Amazon. I've also been doing stand-up for 16 years. I was raised in non-denominational church in Arkansas, but I think we can all agree that just means Baptist. I think that just being Southern Baptist. So, and so I've always been very, very interested in hearing people's stories about their faith and what they believe, and I'm really excited to have this conversation with my friends here. Thank you for allowing us to make this possible.
Thank you, Sydney, so much. Yeah. Tim, let's welcome him with another round of applause, please.
Thank you, Pedro. Thank you, Sydney. Hey, my name's Tim. I'm local here. I'm just down the road in Hermitage, and I am a member of a Baptist church, and there is a running joke that some non-denominational churches are just Baptist church without Baptist on the sign. But I'm an evangelist. I go out and do evangelism. I host a worship service at a local retirement home. So I'm an all-around Bible enthusiast. So I'm excited to talk with, and I will just affirm her podcast is grade A. She's got some awesome guests, and we may even do a follow-up episode. We've talked about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
After this, talking about this.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
be looking for that. Check out her podcast for sure.
Okay, well, thank you, Tim, so much. Okay, well, then let's get into it, okay? So 5 minutes, and the question for you is, it's going to be the same question for you, is, does God exist, Sydney?
So my answer is no. I do not believe that God exists. And I also believe, as an atheist, one of the first things people want to ask you is, what would you do if you woke up tomorrow and science proved that God existed? I would believe in God if science proved it, but I also think that if science proved that God was real, it would not be the Christian God. Based on history, statistics, lots of the things that I believe about the way that the world came about, I just don't believe that the Christian God would be the God should there be one. But at the moment, I have not seen enough evidence to believe that God exists. So they'll ask you things like, but what about beauty? What about morality? What about nature? And I am a human who thinks that human beings can be moral without religion. Many religions do spell out what they believe morals to be, and a lot of those morals are morals that I also believe in. You know, I'm not going to be a murderer or anything like that. You know, I still believe in morality, and I still believe in things like be kind to your neighbor, honor thy father and thy mother, but I don't think that religion is necessary in order to have morals. And I don't think that there is enough evidence on earth to support the existence of a God. When we look at history, when we look at science, and I'll definitely get into this more, hopefully, in some of my responses. I don't want to be one of those people who just say history, science, and then don't follow up. I just don't want to spend my whole 5 minutes doing that. But I am quite solid in my beliefs based on what I've been shown, what I've read, what I've been told, what I've researched, personal experiences. Many of the same things that cause people to believe in God are the exact same experiences that I've had that have shown me that I don't. But I'm also always open to that conversation, and I'm always open to talking more about it and explaining myself and going into deeper reasons why that is. So what am I at?
You still have 3 minutes.
I still have 3 minutes. All right.
You can yield if you want to, whatever you want.
Well, also, something that's really important that I think is also important for the audience to know, for Tim to know, is that when people tell me they have experienced God, when people tell me they've felt or seen God, I always believe them. But I use the analogy oftentimes where they tell you sometimes when you eat cilantro, some part of the population tastes cilantro, other parts of the population taste soap, right? And when somebody says they taste soap while they're eating cilantro, I 100% believe that's their experience, but in my experience, I have always tasted cilantro. And so I feel the same way about religion. For various reasons and things that I've read and research that I've done, I simply cannot say that I believe in a God and be honest with whoever it is I'm speaking to. But that doesn't mean that people who say they've experienced God or who pursue God are lying or wrong in any way about how they feel or what they've seen. So I did want to make sure that people understand, if you have had an experience and you tell me I felt God or I saw God or this was the moment that I needed in order to believe in God, I 100% believe you. I personally have just never experienced God.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for that. It's nice. Thank you. Okay, well, Tim, here's the question for you. Does God exist?
Yes. I would affirm that, yes, God does exist, as you might have guessed. Thanks so much, Sydney, for that. I'm excited to get into some of the details a little bit. So over the past couple of weeks, or the past month, since I knew that we'd be speaking together, and Sydney and I, we're in a unique situation now because we really don't know each other yet. Yeah. We just met like 4 or 5 weeks ago, and so we're getting to know each other through this, which I think is just a great model that you're talking about, thing for us to model. But as I was thinking about, what are my reasons that God exists, I was trying to separate what are my reasons, aside from what might be like a textbook answer or some historical argument that maybe a Christian history or Christian philosopher might make, but what are the most meaningful reasons for me? And so that's what I kind of want to lead with tonight. And I think I can illustrate it this way. So this is a true story. I was in the park with my family, with my wife and kids down in Franklin, and I happened to hear, as I was chasing the kids around, I happened to overhear 2 men talking. And these men were talking about an interesting philosophy that I had never heard of before. And he was saying that individuals don't really exist. Instead, what exists, and I'm doing my best to represent them, and I hope I can do it faithfully. But individuals don't exist, but instead what exists are events and occurrences that make up an individual. That you have cells dividing and stomachs digesting and brains doing their brain chemical reactions and things like that. And a person is just a way we summarize a collection of events. And so I was listening to this and I was pretty intrigued. And I said, do you mind if I make a comment? If I butt in your conversation a little bit? And they were like, oh yeah, for sure. And I said, okay, what I think I'm hearing you saying, if I can use this analogy that I came up with, is that if I take a trip to the beach, well, the trip doesn't really exist, but instead, what you have are events that make up this trip. I put gas in the car, I put luggage in the car, I load the kids in the car, we drive to all those different occurrences make up what I just summarize as the trip. And he said, oh yeah, that sounds pretty fair. And I said, okay. My only issue with that is how do you account for the worth of the individual? The worth of a human being, what I believe human beings to have an inherent dignity and value. And in his system, not that this is yours, but this is just a way to illustrate what I believe, his system was lacking that. And one of the biggest reasons that I do believe that a God exists, kind of breaking that out from who that God might be, the Christian God, is the best way to account for that is a creator who has created and instills value outside of the human being or outside of a scientific process or any other process you could come up with to create that within our world would be that if that dignity and value is inherent outside of that system. And so, number one, that's one of the reasons I believe that God exists. Also within my life experience, intelligence, order, and design, purposeful design, in my experience so far that I've observed, always comes from a purposeful and intentional creator or mind. And I believe that's kind of the shared experience, and we can get into that a little bit. And then the last half of that is, I'm a Christian, not just a deist, because I believe in the event of the resurrection, the historical reliability of the Gospels, and the person of Jesus. So, number one, there are reasons why I believe in God, and then more specifically, then that begs the question, who has that God revealed himself to be? And I believe that he has revealed himself through Scripture, through Jesus Christ, the God-man, and that ultimately is why I'm a Christian.
Thank you so much. Okay, thank you so much. Okay, Sydney, Tim, you guys want to ask each other questions? I have a list here, but I want to invite you, according to what you guys said, you guys want to follow up?
Can I comment on something that you said about experiences? I actually agree with you 1,000% about experience, and it's a very incredibly respectful thing that you've shared about people's experiences. It's you can't negate somebody's experience. You can talk about it and you can listen to it.
Right.
But I couldn't negate somebody's experience, and
right.
Like someone that says, I believe that the Bible is true and I have that conviction. Mm-hmm. Or I believe the Bible because it's proven its principles to be true in my life. that there's that. And there are other religions out there that use experiences in different ways, and it's wonderful to hear about somebody's experience. But I couldn't possibly argue,
Right.
that you didn't have that experience. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So that was a great point, and I totally agree with you on that one.
Thank you. And do you mind if I make a comment towards?
The less I talk, the better. So please go ahead.
So thank you so much for validating that, because I also teach storytelling classes, and we talk all the time about how facts can be right or wrong, right? If we went to the same high school and I say that, oh, I hated prom because the colors were red and black, and you're like, no, the colors were green and white, one of us is wrong, right? But if we went to the same prom and I said it was the worst night of my life and you said it was the best night of your life, both of us are correct.
Yeah.
So you can't be wrong about how you feel. You can only be wrong about factual evidence. And just to kind of address your point of value, I think that value is subjective. I do not think that there is anyone who has zero value.
Okay.
But I do think that value is based on human experience. For example, I am in a relationship. I value that person more than I have valued many people in my entire life. But I also recognize that if that same person didn't show up to Pedro's birthday party, he probably wouldn't notice. Not that he doesn't care about him, not that he doesn't think he's a good person or worthy of value, but that person's value to me is different because of how I feel about that person and having met that person and experiencing that person. His value is different than the value he would have to somebody like Pedro, who values everyone. Like, Pedro treats everyone like they are your best friend. It's amazing. Like, everybody loves Pedro. But I also recognize that his life would be fine without that person in it, if that makes sense. And the same thing can be said about parents or relatives or teachers. The value that someone places on you directly does not outweigh how much value they have in general. Value is something that we create, I think, or that we experience through human interaction, right? I also have a bunch of parrots, and people in this room probably would not want to have 10 parrots like I have, because I value those traits and those animals and those pets a lot differently than most people would value them. Most people would say, oh, they're so loud. Not that they want to kill those animals at all. They would say, no, don't do that. Don't put them down. But also, please don't bring them to my house, right? So I think that value is something that you can create either by literally you are a valuable person because you build the community around you. Maybe you're a carpenter, a construction worker, something like that. You can create value in the ways that you interact with people. So if you are kind to somebody who other people dismiss, maybe they don't even really notice this person exists, you probably have more value in that person's eyes than in other people who know you personally. So by not having a God, that doesn't mean that people don't have value. I think it's just a different type of value that people see through God's eyes when they read the scripture, when they read about how God views them and how they should treat people. That's just another type of value that we can place on another human being when we treat them with kindness and when we treat them the way that we would running into them on the street.
So can I press you a little bit on that one?
You should.
Press me.
You should press him.
So, okay, I think I'm following what you're saying, and I do believe that atheists and non-theists do believe that people are valuable.
Sure. Yeah.
So that's not an accusation I would ever make. But for value to be subjective, so for an individual who might be a hermit or doesn't have a lot of human interaction. Right. Would there be a true, could I say this person is less valuable or doesn't have much value, and would you affirm that as a true statement?
So if, say for example, I were to stay home for the rest of my life, I were to be a hermit, I were to never leave, there is intrinsic value that I think we should put on human lives, right? They should have food, water, they should have healthcare, they should have a place to live, they should have a place to be safe. Every human is valuable in my eyes in that way. But I would not say that person is valuable to the community. I would not say that that person is valuable to the education system. Like, there are different types of value.
Sure.
And I have no value as, say, a football coach. I have no value in that regard at all. And if somebody were to tell me that, if somebody were to walk up to me and be like, I think you are worthless on this field, I would be like, you are correct. You are absolutely correct.
Yeah,
but if that
me
person
both.
were to say, because you're not good at this, you also don't deserve basic human decency, that's totally different. And so I think that the value that God and the belief in God gives people is valid, and they feel that, and I'm glad that it perpetuates that value. But I think that you can still feel like a valuable human being even if you're not a follower of Christ.
Okay.
Does that answer?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
I was going to say, if you got more, hit me with it.
Absolutely.
Can I ask you a question?
Please.
Is there anything that you really enjoy that, say, maybe your wife and kids or people close to you don't enjoy as much, and when they listen to you talk about it, they're being respectful, and you can kind of see them like zone out a little bit?
Oh, 100%.
But that still has value to you, right?
Yeah.
That thing still matters a lot.
Yeah, it's still, yeah, I would say.
Exactly. That's exactly the kind of feeling I'm talking about. Is that doesn't mean it doesn't matter. That doesn't mean that you don't matter. That doesn't mean that the amount of joy that you get from that thing doesn't matter. But if you ask me to participate in it, I'm gonna hard no, hard no, thank you. But that doesn't mean that it's less valuable or it makes you less valuable because you enjoy something that fewer people do.
Yeah. So what I think I'm hearing you say is that value always has a perspective in mind. So
Yes.
I like talking about worldviews more than my wife does.
Yes.
And so I might value that discussion.
Yes.
Or that discussion might have more value to me
Yes.
from my lens than it would for her.
Right.
And so in your worldview, value always has a context
Yes.
attached to it. And that context
Yes.
is always the lens by which we talk about value.
Exactly. Have you guys ever seen on Facebook those memes that'll say like one has to go, and it has like 3 restaurants or like 6 different dishes? I don't know. You know what I'm talking about? Different people hold different value to each
Yeah.
one of those things. And you know, when somebody says, "Oh, the KFC must go," it always starts a fight in the comments, right? I feel like value always has a scope, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Is it okay if I ask a question?
Please.
I have questions for
Yeah,
you
yeah,
as
yeah,
well.
yeah.
Sydney, I just want to understand this. So, because I've never heard this, and this is very interesting. Let me see if I am understanding well. Is it your position that value is directly proportional to the way you know people and what they do? Is that
It
kind of?
can be.
Oh, okay.
So, for example, Queen of England, never met her, but she seemed like a very valuable person, right? The whole world would say that she held a lot of value. I never met her. I don't know what she's like. Tabloids talk a lot of smack. Don't know how much of that we can believe. But in terms of her impact on generations of people, I don't have to meet her to know that she is a very valuable individual. Now, saying somebody is valuable is not saying that they're kind or not saying that they're necessarily a good person. And that's something I think you discern by meeting people and interacting with them. But I think value can be measured in your literal actions, what you do for yourself, for those around you, for your family, for your job. It can be measured in how much you mean to somebody. I would hope that if I became a quadriplegic and I could no longer physically add value, I could mentally, emotionally, spiritually add value, and people in my life would still feel that I held value. I would not be surprised in that instance if somebody didn't think I was valuable in terms of building things or creating things with my hands, but that's a different type of value that doesn't necessarily impact my overall value as a human being, if that makes sense.
So you're hearing all of this, Tim, very interesting. From your worldview, because you said in your presentation that the value and the dignity of humanity was kind of is a very important point for you to actually further the thought, hey, God exists and He wants to. So would you tell us a little bit more from your worldview, the meaning of value?
Yeah.
And, yeah.
So what I mean by value, and I think we're close on that in a lot of ways, is that an individual always has a level of an inherent dignity and respect of worth. The worthless person ultimately doesn't exist, and this could be somebody, a hermit who never leaves their house, that is known to no one. They live on a mountain in Alaska. I'm sure that person exists. Not a far-fetched example, I think, but or a baby abandoned in the street, or any of these situations that you could come up with, regardless of what they can contribute to society or who might value them, that they have an inherent worth and dignity that is always there and never zero. And to me, and that is because the perspective is always from, or what I'm trying to always look in the world is from a creator being, so from a God. I'm trying to understand his creation. If it is his creation, what is his purpose with this creation, and the value that comes from that is without regard to a value that I might establish to it. And I think that's reflected in Christianity in being made in the image, what we would say being made in the image of God. And there's that idea of what it means to be the image of God is explored in different ways. And one more thing I'll comment on that is we see that in Scripture in an interesting way when after the flood and Noah and God's establishing what's called the Noahic covenant in the Bible, he prescribes the death penalty for somebody that murders a person. And he says it's because human beings are made in the image of God, somebody who kills a person must be put to death because they violated this. Interestingly enough, the death penalty there is also prescribed to animals. An animal must be put to death under the Noahic covenant because they've killed something that is this representation of God's image. And so I think there's a value. I'm kind of getting into a different topic with animal life and things like that, but
no, that is good. So I think we have covered this topic well and very well and enough. So let's move on. I have a question for you.
Okay.
When it comes to, of course, it branches out from the main question: does God exist? So my question, Tim, assumes something, but still, I think it's a fair, good question. So, isn't it strange that when we ask the question, does God exist, since we think some people believe that God created the universe, this incredible entity with all these incredible attributes, is it possible that the fact that some people keep asking this question, does God exist, undermines his existence, because it should be more like visible or tangible? What do you think about that?
What a good question, Pedro. So why do we even have to ask the question, right? Why do we even have to ask the question of why God exists? And so as I think about that, what I don't want to do is presume anyone else's reasons. And so, I'm thinking, do I answer that from a theological standpoint on what are the biblical reasons?
Tim's answer.
Yeah, Tim's answer. I think that we have a desire, and I promise I'm not trying to project this onto you, Sydney, to be our own gods, to be our own arbiters of right and wrong. And I think that all of humanity shares this. And I'm not saying, I'm not saying that everybody would profess that is. Almost nobody would say that that's the reason that they don't believe in God. But in my worldview, humanity has this problem where I want to be the most powerful. I want to determine these things. I'm okay with rules as long as I am the source of those rules. And so I see that as a theological problem of the world. So that's one of the reasons that I would say that people reject the existence of God.
Interesting. Sydney, kind of in the same area type of question. There seems to be, I don't have data right now, but we kind of know there are many people in the world. The percentage is pretty high. We can call it whatever we want, like a tendency, an idea, something that is kind of pushing people to actually believe that there's something beyond the material world. So I'm not talking only about Christianity. I'm talking about beginning of civilization, people just wondering, what is this? There must be something, which doesn't entail that it's there. But now, my question is for you, as an atheist, when you think about this tendency that human beings seem to have, what do you think about that? What does it come from? What things do you think about that?
You could not have asked me a better question. So my favorite book is by a now friend of mine. He wasn't a friend of mine when I read the book. His name is Dr. Anderson Thompson, and he is a psychiatrist. And he has a book called Why Do We Believe in Gods? Why We Believe in Gods. And it's actually historically beneficial for human beings to believe in gods. And the entire book is about why it has aided human beings all throughout history in believing in God. For example, studies have shown that human beings are more likely to behave themselves, do things like remain nonviolent, not steal, remain productive, if they feel like they're being observed. And they are also much more likely to assist in development of the village and the people around them if there is a reward also. So human beings figured out millions of years ago, even like the pre-human creatures believed in many ways in deities and deists. Because we can see based on the art that they've drawn on walls and things like that, there has always been this drive to believe in a God because our brains tell us there has to be a reason all of these things are happening. There has to be a reason the sun continues to come out and the rain continues to come down and the crops continue to grow. And there also has to be a reason why they don't. What can we do to make sure that the sun keeps coming out and the grass keeps growing and the crops keep growing and we keep experiencing bountiful harvests, right? And so what they decided, or what they thought they had figured out was, okay, every time that I make a sacrifice or do this prayer or do this dance or whatever their culture tells them, the sun continues to come out and it continues to allow our crops to grow. So I'm going to keep doing it because I don't have enough evidence to prove that's not what's going on right now. And the next thing you know, you've got a new religion. You've got something that you do for the sun, something that you do for the crops, something that you do for the rain, something that you do for earthquakes, things like that, when the full moon comes out. And so it was actually beneficial for human beings to say, there is something going on that we need to appease in order to keep peace here on earth, in order to survive. And it also helped them kind of keep members of the tribe in check because, it's never, I don't know if you guys know this or not, but it's never a good idea to kill members of the tribe because that's less hunters, less gatherers, less people, right? So if you say, please don't kill other villagers, the one villager who keeps doing it is like, why? You say, because it's bad. And he says who? And you're like, I have had this argument with this man every time he does this. And so you say, did you know there is actually a person in the sun who will reward you if you stop killing people, if you don't kill people, but will punish you really bad for eternity if you do? And they say, oh, I guess I should stop killing people, right? And so the idea of gods has been around for ages. And that's why in the beginning I said, even if science turned around and said, oh my gosh, there's been a God this whole time, it wouldn't be the Christian God, because Christianity is an amalgamation of other religions that have existed historically before Christians even existed. For example, did you know that the Mayans and the Incas had a God that was born of a virgin? He was. I'm not going to butcher his name on stage. It starts with an X. It's very difficult to pronounce. But he was their version of what I would translate into Jesus. And he was born of a virgin. And that virgin was the sun goddess who provided for the earth. And one of the ways that she provided was she sent her son to earth to help, again, with the crops and the bounty. But you have to keep the sun happy in order for these blessings to be upon you, if that makes sense. And so it actually fascinates me when I think about how people have always benefited from the belief in God. And that's why I believe people when they say that they're very religious and that it feels important to them to do whatever their religion requires them to do.
What about you, Tim? Go ahead.
Well, so what is the link there between the Mayan gods and the God of the Hebrews?
So I was saying that a lot of Christianity is derived from other religions. So this idea that the God or that your salvation or your Savior came from a virgin is actually available in ideas that were pre-Jesus even existing.
So I struggle with that one a little bit.
Sure.
So are you saying that the Mayan religion specifically influenced the Hebrews
Just
on
an
a different
example.
continent?
Just
Or
an
that it's just,
example.
hey, there's similarities between what they believed on this continent versus what they came up with this continent, right?
Just an example of how religions that, as a former Christian myself, we would look at and we would say, every single other thing about this religion is whack, but this part is the same. There are a lot of religions that we as Christian human beings would say, I believe nothing that that religion says. They are a savage community, things like that. But at the same time, some of their stories or some of the aspects of their religion are the same as ours. And we're either we derived from them, or maybe we didn't. But this idea that even people who disagree with religions can say there's a lot of similarities between these religions. Me, as a totally secular person, I don't believe there's a God at all. But I'm like, isn't that interesting how even when we look at religions that we think are entirely third world, we wouldn't do anything that they do, they still share some of the details of what we then have in our religion. Whether it was derived directly or not is up for debate, and which is why we're here, I guess.
Yeah. Well, no, to have a conversation.
Yeah,
Do you want to follow up?
Yeah, so I guess I would counter that a little bit by saying there are similarities in between many religions, and the more you zoom out, the more similar that they're going to be. And so there are Egyptian myths where some of their gods have died and rose from the grave again. And if I were to phrase it like that, it would be like, oh yeah, absolutely, that sounds like Jesus. But when you examine what really occurred in that resurrection, my assessment would be that it's actually more different from Christianity than it would be similar. Sure. Furthermore, I would say that when we look at all of history past, and I think we could agree that most civilizations believed in God or some kind of a God. I would say that there's maybe something more to that we should consider, that everybody has this drive to believe in a God, because when we observe the world around us, our natural reaction is that this could not have happened by chance or natural process. And that has been the consistent human experience since humanity began.
Can I respond to that?
Yeah.
I would argue that I agree with that until modern history, and with the advent of Google and research and technology, the reason I think we're seeing so many people turn secular is because they are getting those questions answered. The Mayans, they would say, I need a reason why the sun keeps coming up, and I need a reason why it gets mad at me and it burns all my crops. As modern human beings, we can say, that's because the world is 24 hours, and that's the turning of the sun. So I totally agree with everything you said. Up until now, as we're seeing, especially in the United States, we're seeing record numbers of people identify as secular or spiritual, but without a religious identity. It's because those questions that so many human beings have had for as long as we've existed are now being answered through technology, research, science, things like that.
Yeah.
Interesting. Oh, go ahead, please.
Right. So, to me, maybe just to step us into a different category a little bit off of that, science and God are related categories, but different. So I would say that I could never prove the existence of God by the scientific method. Because in the same way that I could not prove the existence of Shakespeare within the play of Hamlet itself.
Okay.
Now, I would say that the Hamlet suggests an author, but I couldn't tell you much about Shakespeare, just from the play. Maybe some things generally about him, but I couldn't prove to you that Shakespeare existed. So I would say that science, and this is probably just plug in for a future discussion that we'll probably have in more detail for this. To me, science and religion are compatible.
Okay.
Because God has created the world with an order and design. And there's a passage in Deuteronomy that says, somebody here probably knows it, that the mysteries of the world are for kings to discover. So God has created the world with the intent for us to discover how it works.
Yeah.
And so how the universe began, what the 24-hour day cycle is, why is it 24 hours, what is gravity? All that stuff, I think there are scientific answers to. and that we will find conclusions on that. But it doesn't necessarily, I would say by any means, I don't feel a conflict there with my belief in a God.
Sure. Can I just say one thing? The only difference with the analogy that you used is we have Shakespeare's corpse. We have his body. We know where he's buried. We can DNA test him and we can find him and we can see him and we can pick up the pieces of Shakespeare if we want. So while I totally understand that analogy being like not being able to prove the existence of someone through the work written about them or by them, I think the main difference is if I were a staunch Shakespeare, not apologist. What's the opposite of apologist? If I was out here, a conspiracy theorist who like thought Shakespeare wasn't real, somebody could very easily be like, he is real. Here's where he lived. Here's his marriage certificate. Here's these things. Whereas with God, he is more of, I feel like his existence is built more upon the faith of belief.
Interesting. This is so, I'm enjoying so much.
Me too. This is great.
Could we be here for 3 or 4 hours? This is so fun.
I got nothing.
We have
ready.
touched on value. We have touched on belief. I would like to ask you both the following question. This might be a bit ambiguous, but I really want to ask it. I think about these things a lot. I just wanted to see how you guys would answer this. I'll start with you, Tim.
All right.
How much did your socio-cultural background dictate your beliefs today? And I want to ask that question to you as well. And I'll rephrase it a little bit for you. I mean, it's the same, but go ahead.
Great question. So am I a Christian because I was raised in a Christian home? It's not exactly what you're asking. Similar nature of question, but
more than Christian, believe in God. Like,
okay, sure.
I mean, of course, but
yeah. So I was raised in a Christian home, and you could draw a conclusion that I am a Christian because I was raised in a Christian home, or I believed in God because my immediate influences believe in God. But think back to the experience question or point that Sydney and I were discussing. I would never tell somebody, let's say they're an atheist or a non-believer, and they grew up in a non-believing home. I would never come to the conclusion, or I would try to guard myself against a bias that would come to the conclusion that their upbringing is the reason that they hold this view now. Because I could say the same thing about somebody who was raised in a Christian home but now an atheist, that it was your upbringing that resulted in your non-belief.
Yep.
Just as much as you could say, I was raised in a Christian home and that is the reason that I am a Christian today. So, I couldn't say that there were not influences that perhaps have influenced me in this way, but it's not an area that I put much stock in terms of, the reason that you're a non-believer today, or Bethany, whom we heard speak last month, and you, Pedro, that you are what you believe today because of those influences. I hope I didn't muddy that up too much.
I completely understand what you're saying.
So kind of the same question, Sydney. I guess every time that I have conversations with my atheist friends, this question, I love hearing their answers, because in this area of the world, Christianity is very prevalent. So you're born and it's everywhere. I was born in Spain and super secular. You see churches, imagery, but no one cares.
Right.
But in this culture, Christianity is everywhere. And then you get to believe in it, but then you stop believe because there's some people, I don't know, you actually answer some questions, you have some experiences, and I just wonder, this is very difficult. I would say it's almost impossible to find an answer for this. But if you had born in a place where Christianity wasn't prevalent at all, and then you're faced with the statements, that the affirmations of Christianity, it's difficult to imagine all of this, but what do you think that your beliefs about actually not Christianity, the belief in God, would that change? I hope you kind of understand what I'm trying to do.
Yeah. So and feel free to course correct me if I go in a different direction than you intended. I 1,000% think that I was Baptist because I was raised in a Baptist environment. I'm 1,000% sure that's the case. The reason I called myself non-denominational is because my parents called themselves non-denominational, and it wasn't until I was older that I realized we'd just been Baptist the whole time. Fantastic casserole, though. No regrets there. So I also believe that if I had been raised Anywhere else where that religion is prevalent, I would have believed that religion. For example, I probably would not be an atheist right now if I were raised in Utah, because a lot of the beliefs of the Mormon religion involve rejecting people who no longer follow the rules. They cut you off from your family. And so that alone probably would have kept me practicing, because I would have wanted to stay friends with my friends. And I'm not at all implying that religions of all kinds do that. That's just an example. If I were born in the Middle East, where it is a crime in many places to not be religious, I'm sure I would still be religious, like no matter who knocked on my door. And so, was there a second part to that question?
No, I think you,
Okay.
yeah, go ahead.
like I 100% think that in my personal experience, I cannot speak for others, I would have literally been anything that my family told me that we were. And if I moved away at the exact same age I moved away, I would still have deconstructed and be an atheist now.
Good. Anything there you want to ask?
So are you an exception to that rule then? Is that how you would view yourself?
I think that each person has an entirely different experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's like a fingerprint. The way that you are what you are is so completely different than me. Even in the similarities, right? Like, American, Caucasian, Southern.
Yeah.
We're still going to have so many differences that I think I would be more shocked and suspicious if I met two people with the exact same story, as opposed to everybody having at least a little bit different of a spin on it.
Yeah. And then just for conversation's sake, since we're like we said, we're modeling this.
Yeah.
I would never, and neither of us have done that tonight, use that as a talking point against someone. That, you're an atheist because you were raised this way, or you were a Christian or a Muslim or a Mormon or whatever because this way. I'm always going to assume that you have your own valid reasons or experiences, and I think everybody should kind of come off the launching pad, with that.
Absolutely. I could not agree with that more. I would never, ever try to guess or assume why people are the way they are.
Yeah.
And if I did, I would be probably wrong the majority of the time.
Yeah, in this case, the question was more like personal, when you wonder about why do I...
Let me answer that a little bit more directly. So I was raised in a Christian home. I didn't come to saving faith until I was about 26. And that's where I think I went from this kind of a cultural belief to where, if you had asked me at any point, I would have believed it, to where it really became a conviction for me. Yeah. And that's where my life really changed. That's when I started wanting to understand the Bible and what it taught and what is theology and the gospel and should I be sharing the gospel. And that was the pivotal moment for me. And so I would say that's the moment where it no longer became the faith of my parents.
Interesting.
And my own. It became my own.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I'm enjoying so much this conversation. Let's move on to another question. I want to hear your thoughts. We're going to talk about evidence.
Okay.
Now, there are many podcasts, 2 trillion, I've counted them. And all of them, it's almost
and Sydney has the best one.
I was going to say, you're about to
has the best
hurt my
one.
feelings.
Wait. No, but meaning talking about evidence and the meaning, philosophical expectations, background, what this means to me, to you, from the context. That is okay. I mean, it's a good conversation to have.
Yep.
Yeah.
But just to simplify it, instead of going to, perhaps you guys want to define it, you guys can define it. But
sure.
Question for you, Tim, and for you, Sydney. I'll start with you, Sydney.
Okay.
When it comes to evidence, and you say, I lack a belief in God, I'm just not convinced. So what type of evidence you would expect from a concept like this to be real? What would you like to see or experience? Would you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that question. I love asking people that question too, because I've never gotten the same answer twice. I think it's one of those things, it's another one of those very personal things where for each person it's different. So for me personally, when I was a Christian, I wanted to be a really good Christian. I really wanted to embody Christianity, what it meant. And I spent so much time praying begging God to show me something, because I never really felt like I fit in with congregations. And so I remember thinking, like, God, if you would just speak to me the way that you spoke to people verbally in the Bible, or if you would show me, the rainbow right now, like you've shown people in the Bible, or if you would something, like if you would just get my mom to say a secret code word, like it doesn't even have to be a miracle, like just get her to say cucumber, like in the next sentence. And I feel like I was a weird kid, guys. You're like, wow, look at my haircut, you know that. So
I think you and I would have been friends.
I think we would have too. And I truly think that if I say the Christian God because that is my scope of what I believed God was at the time. If the Christian God, if it mattered that much to him that I be a believer, because if he had shown himself to me, I would have proselytized, I would have crossed the world, I would have been that person out on the street with the sign, I would have done anything for God for the rest of my life if he had shown me what I had needed to see at the time. And so I remember it being as big of things like part the clouds and take a peek, or little as, here's a secret word, and I'll know that if my mom uses this word in the next day that it will have worked. And I never ever saw results. I never saw results. And people say things like, for example, I only have one kidney. One of my kidneys failed when I was 21. I've heard people say, God showed you his existence by saving you that day. Like you almost died and he saved you. And which I'm like, hey, good point. But we could go down a whole day's worth of rabbit holes if any positive thing is a sign from God. But if God was truly the father figure that he is for Christians, you would think that he would show you what you need in order to have that belief, in order to be like a member of his, I was going to say militia, but no, something more positive. You'd want him to know that you would have done anything for him in that moment, And so if I ask my real dad every day for 10 years to buy me a necklace for my birthday and he buys me sneakers, it's like, I guess like that's evidence that he loves me. But how am I supposed to know if he knows that the one sign, you know what I'm saying? So did I forgot what the original question was. Yeah.
So what about you, Tim? And you can follow up with anything that she says, but if you want to just maybe answer the question first. So when you think about evidence as a Christian, what do you think about, how do you approach this type of question?
Well, kind of like I mentioned in the beginning, so two steps really. Number one, does a God exist? And number two, who is, if he does exist, if we can get past that, then who is that God? And I would say that if I had control, there would be more miracles for me to witness. I would prefer that. But I also have to, I'm not trying to be preachy, but the Bible is a kind of a key to my worldview.
Yeah.
And I have to look at other accounts and things that have happened in the past when the Israelites, they're going through the Exodus and the Red Sea parts, and they cross the Red Sea, and what is the first thing they do when they get to the other side? They make a golden calf. They make an idol. And so I have that in my perspective. It's like, gosh, even if I saw something like that, I feel like I would mess it up and I would come up with a way to not believe that or to discredit that in some way. But I do believe that I have sufficient evidence. So our answers are just inherently a little bit different there. I believe that creation, I would call it creation, is sufficient to indicate that there is a God. Just like we talked about, we would come to a different conclusion when we looked at all human societies before us. We hit on that already. And then I think that there is sufficient evidence for Jesus and the resurrection in terms of his existence, what he did, and then whether or not did he actually rise from the grave. So I believe that the evidence for that is sufficient in terms of the eyewitnesses accounts, extra biblical sources, and things of that nature.
Yeah. May I respond?
Yeah, well, you can add something. Yeah, we have
please.
a short answer, and then we will go to another question. Actually, the last one before we go to the Q&A.
You can go on the last question, actually. No. So I just want to address the eyewitness accounts and things like that.
Sure. Okay. Maybe in a short.
Short.
Very short.
Okay. I mean, no disrespect. I'm just trying to speed through this.
Yeah, please,
So
please.
when I lost my kidney, nobody knew what happened. I went to the hospital. Boom, overnight, I was hospitalized. Nobody saw me for like 3 days. By the time I got to campus, word had gotten around. Somebody told somebody that I had mono. Somebody told somebody that they saw me at a party and that I drank a Red Bull and my heart exploded and I died because the last status I'd ever written was, if I ever drink a 20-ounce Red Bull, remind me not to. And that was in 3 days. People saw me. They literally saw me. They saw what happened. I texted people what happened. They knew the truth. And still, by the time I got back to campus, I had died. I had got mono, like all these other things. So my only question, or not even question, my only statement to make there is, even with eyewitness accounts, even with like letters and things like that, we can always end up victim to the game of telephone. And so that doesn't necessarily mean, I do believe Jesus was a real man, but I question the eyewitness accounts of the miracles that he performed simply because the human brain is infallible, or not infallible, is very fallible when it comes to eyewitness. And that's why in the court of law in the United States, hearsay is no longer accepted as evidence because nobody can really prove that humans remember everything perfectly.
Just very short comment about that.
Yeah.
Like very short. Half a second.
We have a biblical evidence talk scheduled for November, so we'll definitely circle back.
Okay.
November.
But I would say this is not all you talked about, but the Bible being a telephone game is a great point to consider, because if we could do a telephone game in this room with just the first 2 rows, say something silly, and by the time it gets to the other end, it's completely distorted, and the original message is lost. But the Bible, focusing in on that, is unlike the telephone game in that it's not a single line of transmission. So I'm getting at the whole through the centuries transmission, and instead what we have is dozens and hundreds of lines of transmission. Copying Mark or Luke, and what we can do is then compare those copies of Luke together to see where somebody made a mistake or left something out or even made a change. And I believe that we can accurately reconstruct, because we don't have the original Gospel of Luke anymore. That papyrus is dust in the wind. But we can reconstruct what Luke wrote. That's only part of what you talked about, but we got to get on.
Well, thank you guys so much. I have one more question before we go to Q&A. And let's see what happens. I always hear this question is very typical when it comes to this conversation. What would make you change your beliefs? But instead of that, I'm going to accommodate that question to each worldview. I hope I do a good job. If not, then
I hope so too, Pedro.
Don't invite me anymore to be a moderator. Tim, I'll start with you.
All right.
Actually, for you, I want to ask you that question. Experience, evidence, scripture. Do you doubt? And if you do you consider anything that could happen in your life in terms of evidence or whatever that would lead you to stop believing in God and change dramatically your life in that respect?
So let me break that up just a little bit. So do I doubt? The answer is yes. I have times when I doubt. I have times when I challenge my own belief. And I would say that whatever your worldview is, whatever religious, non-religious, you need to have those times and question yourself. So I do have times where I sit there and just go, gosh, am I just getting it all wrong? Am I just wrong on my belief? And I go back and I check those again and again and again, and I'll probably do that to varying degrees for the rest of my life. Yeah. And I think that's healthy. So that's part one. Part two, what kind of evidence would change my mind? And it's hard for me, I will say, would I be willing to change my mind? I'll say yes. What kind of evidence would need to be presented in order to, for that to occur? And I believe that the case for Christianity is so strong that it would require something pretty dramatic. Some kind of miraculous, undeniable revelation. What I think is be interesting, because you would say that this would be the case for you in the other direction. There would need to be some kind of miraculous revelation that has, negated not only my life experience, but the revelations of the apostles that I believe to be are true, inerrant, infallible, and reliable. The same with Paul and things like that. So I'm not sure what that would be, But I'm definitely open to entertaining the idea of, if somebody had something specific, if this was presented, yeah, I will reevaluate.
Thank you, Tim. Okay, well, Sydney, here's my question for you.
Yes.
Of all contingent things that exist, when you actually, even if we get to understand everything, the way it works and it functions through the scientific method, let's imagine that we get to the point that we understand everything. You have the whole compendium of existence, which still, whether we like it or not, it's still unexplained, like the whole unity of the contingency of existence. So when you think about that as an atheist, where does your mind go when it comes to, I don't want to bring expectations to the questions because you might say, we don't need an answer for that.
Yeah.
But when you think about existence itself, like the famous question from Leibniz, why is there something rather than nothing? And those type of questions, with your worldview right now, how do you entertain those thoughts? Where do those thoughts take you?
Yeah, absolutely. I will say, I still pray when there's turbulence on a plane, just in case. I'm not like this is never ever a thing. I just, anyway. So one of the things that I really enjoy about not being religious, and I am not saying that religious people don't do this. I'm just saying one of the benefits I personally have found from not being religious is that I never have the answer to everything. I'm always searching. I'm always searching. I'm always searching. And I hope that we never get to a point where I know everything, because I know I'll be disappointed in the answer. I know that what my mind wants it to be is probably way more interesting than what it actually is. But I don't know where the first microbe came from that created the next, that created the next, that created the next. But I love that I don't know that, and I know that I'm going to spend the rest of my life researching that and looking that up and reading about that and wondering about that and talking to my partner about that and just having these conversations that I honestly think bring people together in a way that's just absolutely magnificent. But the few things that I do know, I'm pretty confident about, right? I'm not confident about a lot of things, but when I do a lot of research on something, or when I listen to, say, documentaries or things from scientists that are reputable, that we can trust, the more information they give me about where we come from, the more questions I have. I've never finished a book or a documentary and been like, well, that's the answer to that. That's good to know. I've been like, wait, that's the end? Like, that's it? Like, that's all that I get? So I don't know that I would ever truly feel like I had all the answers to everything, but I hope that never happens.
So the answer would be, at this point, I don't know.
I don't know.
Perfect. Well, guys, everyone, let's give them a round of applause, please.
Okay.
Okay, well, this is the Q&A section. The English language loves acronyms. Q&A, question and answers. I always have so many troubles. Some people talk with using so many acronyms, and I don't understand many of those. Okay, so Q&A, we have a mic. Elliot here, please say hi to Elliot. Hi, Elliot.
The Q&A section is pretty simple. I'm sure you're all very familiar with it. All you do is throw that hand up in the air, raise it high, and we will run around. Pedro's actually the one in charge, so he's going to call out who I am supposed to bring this microphone to. And then from there, do not monologue like I am. Do not end your sentence with a period or an exclamation point. Make it a question and challenge our speakers, please. So who has a question?
We have one over there. There?
Up there?
No. Okay, we have one there.
Yes, thank you. Tim, you mentioned intrinsic worth,
Yep.
and even going so far as saying that the laws of God say that taking a human life was forbidden.
Yep.
In light of that, how do you interpret the justification of the flood?
Yeah, absolutely. So, totally valid question. And there are instances where God wipes out this people or effectively ends the world with things like the flood. When categories are important in this instance, because my relationship to you or to Sydney is a part of creation and is not the same as a creator-creation relationship. So God can do things that he wills with his creation in a different way than I can do with his creation. So there are oughts and shoulds that I have that God does not, because the earth is his to do with as he wills, if he's truly God, and and all that thing. So with the flood, I would just say, we can talk about whether he shouldn't have, why did he do that, and things like that. But essentially, what I'm trying to say, I'm not God, so I can't treat his creation any way that I want to.
Thank you so much for the question. We have a question. I think I saw this friend over there next to, yes.
Hi, Tim. You had mentioned that one of your reasons for believing in God was that all of this life couldn't have happened without him. Why couldn't it have had happened without him?
Why couldn't it have? Well, so we could ask the question of abiogenesis, can life come from non-life? I think I'm looking at that in regards to what I talked about at the beginning, it's more of a probability. When I look at the design of the human mind, my experience is that intended design, I'm not just talking about the pattern of a snowflake, but the intended design of the human mind always comes as a result of another intelligent mind. And so I believe that is a consistent experience that we have. So I'm not saying that it could not have happened, but even Darwin didn't seek to answer the question of how life began. But I think it's more probabilistic to me that it did not happen just as the result of a chance process.
Thank you. One question for Sydney. Anyone wants to ask a question to Sydney here in the front? Elliot? Thank you.
Hi, Sydney.
Hi.
So at the very beginning of the conversation, we were talking about morals and where we get our morality. And I kind of have two questions that they go very much hand in hand. And I guess the first question would be, do you believe in anything metaphysical?
No, I do not. Nothing metaphysical,
Okay.
no. He asked if I believe in anything metaphysical.
Okay, then following up, where would you... So you believe that morality is subjective based on what you said earlier. How do you square that with some of the monsters of history, Stalin, things 100%. Like that, who would say that, I think we can all agree they're bad people, right? They weren't doing the moral thing, but
Absolutely.
they would have said they were.
Thank you for the question.
That's a great question. So I think that morality comes from two places for everyone. There's inherent morality, and then there's learned morality. So for example, if I were born in the Middle East, I would feel a lot differently about certain morals that we have here in the United States. For example, I believe that in every country, it's very likely, with the exception of a few maybe related to religion, maybe not, reasons, you're not supposed to murder people, you're not supposed to steal, you're not supposed to lie. Like, those are pretty inherent. Now, when it comes to the actual minutia involved in how badly you get punished for certain things, or whether certain things are definitely illegal or not, that changes depending on where you are. So I think there are some things, for example, if my parents didn't value morals as much as somebody else's parents, I would probably have a lot different attitudes about certain things than other things. And then, there's laws that are forced, so we could argue that those are forced morals. Also, mental illness is a very real and important thing. And I think that mentally ill individuals, they do not process morals always the same way that we do. And there has been historians have researched some of these horrible people, and they found that certain medications they were on could alter their brain, certain things that they used to consume or drink could alter their behavior, things like lead in the paint in their home could alter their behavior. One of the reasons why we throw tomatoes at performers we don't like is because in Shakespeare's time they thought that tomatoes were poisonous, when really what was happening was tomato was eroding their lead plates, and they were eating off lead plates, and they were losing their mind, and we were like, oh no, stop eating tomatoes, right? Back then, I would have told people, stop eating tomatoes, right? Because I didn't know any different. So morality, I don't think, comes from one place. I think there is inherent morals, and then there are learned morals. And some of these horrible, awful, evil people that have lived in this world had different learned morals, or they just didn't care to learn those morals, or they were given too much power too young, or they had a mental illness or a traumatic brain injury, or they were eating things they were allergic to. There's a million ways that your brain can be impacted by your environment directly. And you feel like you are totally sane. You feel like every decision you're making makes perfect sense in your brain. And you don't understand why anybody would think that was a bad thing. Or when you catch on that they think it's a bad thing, you don't care, right? You just keep going. So that's what I would say is there are some morals that are inherent, like we discussed, certain things that we would do to the tribe we discovered were a bad idea, and we started spreading the word that nobody should do those things. And then there are things we learned from our parents, like stealing a snack out of the snack basket at my house may not be considered stealing, but at your house maybe it is. Those are learned morals. And then the entire third trajectory is the idea of mental illness or our environment impacting us in a negative way that forces the way that our brains digest information and behave. And some are curable and some are not.
Thank you. Thank you so
Great
much for the question.
Yeah.
We have a question there.
Just as a reminder, real quick, folks, you don't need to yell into the microphone, but do project as loud as you can, because we all want to hear.
Question for Sydney. How should a society or political order see individual value individual value and dignity, and why?
I'm so sorry.
Is it okay, Elliot, or could we...
How should a society...
Yeah, the mic. Oh, you can use mine, actually.
Yeah. How should a society or a political order see individual value and dignity, and why? And if there is no ought in your answer, does a democracy not have the same value as a tyranny?
That last part, does democracy have the same value?
Value as tyranny.
As a tyranny.
Okay, so I think with things like the Geneva Convention, we've decided as a human race the baseline expectation for what human rights are. So there are some things that as a society, like the UN, the United States, everybody's come together and we've said, these are the rules that we are deciding are the basic human rights that humans should live by. And if you don't allow humans in your country to live that way, you are a bad country. You're not providing for your people. So I think that the government should throw out that first part of the question. So sorry. Yes, so there are certain ways that they legally have to value because they'll get in trouble from the UN if they don't, right? But there are also ways that the government should look at a human being, and even if you're not a builder, even if you're not a banker, as a society and as a member of this economy, you hold that in your hand. If you're never spending money, you're not benefiting the economy. If you're never purchasing, you're not benefiting the economy. So if anything, they should actually be very concerned with how they treat us with value, because if we all, as a group, decide to stop doing things the way they're done, we can actually make a major impact on how well or not well things are going in this country, if that makes sense. Yeah. And so I think the last part of that question, I want to make sure I hit it.
If there's no ought as to why society should value individual dignity, is a tyranny not as valuable? Therefore, is a democracy? Are they not equivalent?
I think a tyranny is actually the complete opposite of valuing people. Because if a society values its people, the last thing it would want to do is take control and tell them every single solitary thing that they need to do by force. You will see a lot more people spend money and go shopping and make things and buy things in a country, in a society where they feel valued, where they feel like they're voice matters, their money matters, their opinion matters. And whether or not you agree with that, it still makes you feel like when you cast a vote, it makes you feel like you're making that change. And if you live in a tyranny, the likelihood that you are just going to sit and not participate at all because you don't want to participate in the tyrannical rules, but you also don't want to do the opposite because that's a crime, you end up literally doing nothing. You end up like my average Tuesday where I've got a whole to-do list and I don't know where to start, right? So I think the idea of a tyranny is actually proof that there are people out there that try to run their government without respecting the value of human life. And we see what happens with those countries quite often, right? They have famines, they have things like that because people stop farming. They stop going to machine factories to work. They stop doing those things because their choices are either be forced to work 24 hours a day for 10 cents a day, or et cetera, or do something the opposite, try to change your life and go to jail or get tortured and nobody ever sees you again. So you end up with a bunch of people, a large population of people who don't want to be too smart because that's a threat. They don't want to be too dumb because that's a burden. They don't want to work too hard because they'll be made to work harder because they're good at what they do. They don't want to work zero amount of time because then they're considered defacting or defecting from the rules and they stand out in a bad way. They literally just don't want to stand out at all.
Okay. Thank you so much for that, and thank you so much for the question, Jean. Okay, let's ask a question to Tim. Anyone wants to ask a question to Tim? To Tim, okay? Both of them, that works as well.
Okay. So my question is, and this is for both of you, how do you explain in multiple religions the same event happening? So my example would be the flood. In multiple religions that there has been at least a global flood in some of them, or at least some level of flood that wipes out a bunch of people, and have had some kind of heroic story, whether it's through Noah or whoever. And could that mean that all of humanity has had a similar experience?
Let's go with Tim first.
Okay, so could that mean because there are flood stories from multiple civilizations that they shared a common experience? I would say yes. That would be evidence that would not prove, I'm very careful with that word prove, but it would be evidence for a common experience of a global flood. So I don't think the existence of multiple flood accounts, I think they're all very different, but there's a way we can look at that and say that points back to a common occurrence.
And I would say I actually am very flagrant with the word prove, and the flood could show up in every single solitary religion that exists on earth. But if no scientist has proven it ever happened, to me it's a fable. To me there's a lot of stories in the Bible that I totally understand what the message is and what they're trying to get across, but very much like Aesop's fables, I don't actually think happened,
Okay.
if that makes sense.
Thank you so much for the question. Okay, a question for Tim. Anyone wants to ask a question to Tim? Then any people asking questions? Tim? Yeah. Then we'll go to you. Thank you.
Excellent conversation, guys, and I really appreciate it. The question is this. You've had an hour. It's the most obvious question of like the whole thing. Okay, it's a super duper, all-knowing, all-powerful thing, and we've been here an hour. Where is it? I'm asking the hiddenness problem, right? All right, you've had an hour. Like, where's the answer already?
Where's the answer of does God exist?
Yeah.
I mean, I would say, I want to make sure I'm understanding you correctly. I would say the answer is yes, that God does exist, because number one, it is apparent from an observable, a designed, fine-tuned creation. It is observable in our experience of morality and the existence of absolute morality, and God has revealed himself in the person of Jesus Christ, that we can look back reliably upon historical accounts and know who that Jesus is. Is that what you're looking for?
Kind of, yeah. Clearly, he doesn't like the answer, but I think that you answer the question.
I mean, if you want to challenge any particular aspect of that.
That is okay.
Where is it? I mean, vertical reasons. Where is it?
Where is he? What? I would say God is spaceless, timeless, and immaterial. So God is outside of this world. You know, I could talk about how the Holy Spirit, and the Holy Spirit being the third person of the Trinity, indwells every Christian, and God is there. But God, I would say that God is everywhere. And we couldn't necessarily put him under a microscope for those reasons, because in the same way that Shakespeare is outside of Hamlet, God is outside of this universe.
Okay, well, thank you so much for the question. I think we have Elliot, a question over there. We have 9 minutes. I'm loving this.
Thank you. So I have a question for Sydney. So how would you explain basically miracles? So how would you explain that? So like people that have terminal illnesses like cancer or tumors, and they go to bed with like a week to live, and then they wake up the next day and it's just gone. There's no record of it at all. It's just disappeared.
So I will say, I have never heard of that happening. I've never heard of somebody having cancer and then like never having cancer again. But let's just say that happens. I think that the wonderful thing about science is that it's always changing. We're always learning more. We're actually negating things we used to say, right? Like, oh, cigarettes are good for you. Stop smoking them. They're not good for you. I'm so sorry that I said that. You know, like dentists back in the day, they used to recommend things that now we know rot your teeth. So the wonderful thing about science is we're always learning more, and we're never done figuring stuff out. So when something happens that's miraculous, I say, I can't wait until we figure out why that happened. I can't wait until we figure out why the light looked like that, why their body responded that way, why the earth did that thing. I've seen miracles happen, but I don't think that they're miracles in the biblical sense. I think it's, wow, one more thing, we need to figure out why that happened and whether or not we want to make it happen a lot more times, or we want to stop it from ever happening again. I feel the same way about miracles that I do about natural disasters, if that makes sense.
Thank you so much. Okay, any questions? Now, we have there one, and we'll go to you after, okay? Thank you.
How do you process death? And I'm not asking what happens after death.
Yeah.
I'm asking, how do you personally move through death? And that's for both of you.
Yeah. So I used to not have an answer for that question. And then one day I was put under anesthesia, and I truly understood what it meant to be out. Because a lot of times when you tell people, you know, I don't believe in heaven, they say, well, doesn't that make you sad that it's this eternity of darkness and blackness and nowhere? And I say, no, literally, lights out, we are done. So death itself is literally just your body factory resetting, you know, like undoing everything, lights out. I have never experienced such a quick and total stop as I did that day. I literally was counting down and then woke up 5 hours later. No memory, no black behind my eyelids, no fear, no loneliness. So as much as it might scare people, this idea that you literally just shut off, I actually find a lot of comfort in that. I find a lot of comfort and a lot of peace in that. It was the best sleep I'd ever gotten in my life. And I find peace in that the ones that I love and that I care about who have passed on experience that nothing. They're not burning, they're not dancing, they are literally just, they cease to be, they lived their time, and I am very glad that that's how it ended for them.
You asked the question for him as well. Yeah.
I would say death for me, in my worldview, in the biblical worldview, is an enemy. It's the last enemy. It's a bad thing. It's a negative thing. It's something we mourn, regardless of what I might believe about the spiritual state of anybody. So I mourn death. But at the same time, I believe that to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. So I have a reason to rejoice in death as well. So I'll just kind of leave it at that.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. And yeah.
Hello. This is it's primarily for Sydney, but Tim can answer as well. I'm curious to know what you think about the Shroud of Turin, because the Shroud of Turin, what do you think of it? Because atheists often dismiss it as a medieval forgery, but there are so many details about the actual relic itself that, you know, give a differing perspective. And what I mean by this is that there are pieces of pollen on it that date back to Palestine, the 1st century. There are the actual the man that is depicted on the shroud is, it's been studied over and over again by scientists, morticians, and they clearly indicate that it was somebody that had suffered trauma from crucifixion. If it was a medieval forgery, then whoever created it must have had a very knowledgeable, he must have been very knowledgeable about ancient Roman, particularly their weapons and how they punished people and how they crucified them. And
So, that is, what's your question? Let's, again.
I guess you say that if God, what? Yeah, just what do you think about it? I'm sorry, I'm only sorry.
Thank you so much.
No, that's a great question. That's actually a really great question. So a lot of people think that when you're an atheist, you don't think any of the Bible is true. It's not the case. I think that the Bible is much like any story being told to me by any person. Parts of it are going to be true, and parts of it are going to be fabricated or remembered incorrectly, or some of it just fake. So, for example, Jesus shows up in so many different places. I actually think he was a real man. I do. I think he existed. I don't know what he looked like. I don't think he looked like my friend Elliot over here. But I don't think that he had magic powers or miraculous abilities. I think either he was a medicine man who was ahead of his time, where things like washing your hands literally was miraculous and saved lives. I do think that he performed what people knew to be miracles at the time, but I think if we were to be able to travel back in time and go, we would recognize a lot of what he was doing was just self-care, or was healthy, or was sanitary, and they had just never heard of those things at the time. So when he treats somebody who has leprosy and the leprosy goes away, I don't think that was a miracle. I think he literally just knew how to get rid of leprosy in a time when not a lot of people did. I don't think that he was able to divide bread and fish between a million people. I think a real man who did some wild stuff that nobody had ever seen before really existed. I think he was really crucified by the Romans because they thought that he was the Son of God, and they believed everything they were hearing. But I also think the story of Jesus and Jesus' travels and meeting so many people, the game of telephone really widespread some of the things that he did. So maybe he helped somebody with a skin condition, but by the time it got to Egypt, or by the time it got to Jerusalem, or by the time it got wherever it went, he had rose from the dead, and he had gotten this guy to walk who couldn't walk, and that's why Jesus was crucified, because of rumors, some of which are based in fact, and others of which were just because he was the most miraculous person anybody had ever met at the time.
Well,
Can I comment on that real quick?
very, very short.
So the Shroud of Turin is interesting, but I think that's about it. It's not something that I would. I think there are, as Christians, for Christians, there are better things that I could appeal to. The Shroud of Turin is a burial cloth that was this Jesus' burial cloth that's got an imprint on it. There are interesting things to consider about it, but I think the jury is still out on whether it was actually Jesus' burial cloth. But it's definitely something interesting to consider. I'd say that for sure.
Well, Sydney and Tim, 30 seconds, final thoughts, please. I'll start with Sydney. 30 seconds, final thoughts.
I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah.
I've really enjoyed being able to talk to you guys. If you have any questions for me after this, I would love to clarify, give you my email, get answers to you. And if you're interested in being a guest on my podcast, Growing Up Fundy, you are more than welcome to apply to be so as well, whether you're religious or not. I would love to talk to you.
Round of applause for Sydney. Thank you, Sydney. Tim.
Yeah, this has been a blast. I'm legitimately sad that we have to end it. But, just to kind of summarize some of the things I talked about, I do believe that God exists and that we can know who he is. I believe in things like absolute morality. While absolute morals might be few and most of ethics are gray, that absolute morality does exist and that human value is inherent, regardless what a government might determine or things like that. And those things are best explainable, if not only explainable, by the existence of a creator being outside of creation. So kind of like we've already said, if you want to ask me about those, I'm happy to talk to you more about it. That's why we open the doors 30 minutes before, and that's why we hang out after, is because we want you guys to engage with each other and then engage with us once the formalities are over. So, thank you.
Well, Round of applause for Tim, please. Thank you so much. Hey, we really don't take this for granted at all. It is so cool to see you here. Thank you again for TDF for hosting us. And we have there, Bethany, by the way. Say hi, Bethany. We have some snacks and sign-up sheets to receive the newsletter. We have a Facebook account. Isn't that amazing? We have also a Twitter account. Sometimes my jokes sound better cool in my brain. But very excited for the next event. And Elliot want to close saying something. Thank you.
First off, let's give a wonderful round of applause to our moderator, Pedro Garcia, tonight. And there are a handful of wonderful people. Hopefully they'll all raise their hands. We are the folks that are helping make this happen. And then, of course, the Donaldson Fellowship is absolutely wonderful for letting us use this space. Please be a good steward of this space. Make sure that it is free of debris and trash. Again, a reminder, one of the easiest things you can do to help us right now is follow us on the Twitters and the Facebooks, okay? Sign up for that newsletter, but honestly, it is so incredibly easy. Please, just tell somebody. Just tell somebody and get them here. I think if we are here tonight, it shows how much we value these events and hearing from other people and learning and having our ideas challenged. And I think there are more people in the Middle Tennessee area that agree with us. So thank you all once again so much. And don't forget, the last Thursday of every month, we will be having these events. So we hope to see you there. Thank you so much.